All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to see so many people here. So we are here to talk about compliant IEPs versus good IEPs. And if you've been to any of our recent trainings, or if we have been to visit you, you have heard us talk a lot about compliance versus best practice. So we're going to do more of that now. So we're going to start, we'll do some quick introductions. We're going to go through sections 1 through 5 of the IEP, and one of the links that Carly put in the chat box is an IEP form so that you can follow along and know what section we're talking about, if that is helpful for you. And questions, put your questions in the chat box as they come up. We have kind of a big crowd here. We do have chat box check-ins, and we will keep an eye on it as we go. And at the end, we have a bunch of cool resources for you, like a goodie bag. So this is our team. We are the Supervision, Monitoring, and Support team. Colette Sullivan is our Federal Programs Coordinator. She's not here today, but I am Jennifer Gleason. I was a special education teacher before I joined the department about 3.5 years, almost 4 years ago now. And with me is Carly Thibodeau.
Hi, everybody. I am Carly Thibodeau, and I have been with this team for just over 2 years. And before that, I was a teacher for 21 years.
And Ashley is not with us today. She's actually off in another training right now, but we have our Wrangler extraordinaire, Julie Pelletier, here with us.
Hi, I'm Julie Pelletier. I've been with the DOE. I'm actually in my 8th year now. And prior to that, I was admin support at a K-5 elementary school for like 16 years.
Thanks, Julie.
Sure.
All right, so just a little kind of history of how this whole thing came about. We have a bunch of responsibilities, but our main responsibility, the reason we exist, is that IDEA gives us money, right? Not a lot, but it gives us some money for special education. And in return, we have to follow its rules, right? We have to follow IDEA, those regulations. So our job is to come out and visit all of you and make sure that you're following those rules so that then you can get your money. So that's really our job, but another part of our job is professional development. And we started asking a couple of years ago, because we're kind of a newish team, and we started looking at kind of what we were reviewing on IEPs and forms, and asking, why are we looking at this? And we weren't really sure. We didn't know the answer. So we really dug in. We dug into IDEA. We talked a lot to our national technical assistance providers. And what we found out is we were going way too deep with compliance. What we were looking for were really good IEPs, right? Because who doesn't want a good IEP? But compliance is a whole different story. So we kind of separated out our file review process and our professional development, so that when we come on site and we look at your files, we are just looking at really basic compliance. When we do professional development, we are going to do that to best practice. We are going to talk about best practice because that's what we want, right? We want good IEPs. And also, if you end up in due process, you probably don't want to go in there with just your basic compliance. You want a little more heft to it. So that's where we are. We have had a lot of conversations about just this, right? We're looking at IEPs. If we've been on site with you, we are having conversations with each other, and we'll say, but that's not good. Yeah, it's compliant, but it's not good. And I mean, as far as IDEA goes, we are only looking at compliant. So a compliant IEP is not necessarily a good IEP. So we are still struggling with that. You're going to hear us have conversations for years to come because it's hard for us to, as it would be for you, think about your students. It would be hard to say, well, that's enough when you really want more. So as an example, if you have a parent at a meeting and they choose to waive their 7-day notice to implement the IEP right away, compliance would just be documenting that in the written notice. All you have to say is, parent waived their right to 7-day notice. Best practice would be to have them sign that optional form. So this is kind of the thing we're talking about, compliance versus best practice. This is a quick reference document, which Carly has also put the link to that in the chat box. And this is just, we have one of these for every form on our website, and it's color coded. So if it's red, it's compliance. You have to do this. If it's blue, it talks about best practice. What should you do? So these are handy things to have around. And again, we have one for every form. So this is section 1 and 2. You could see it's all compliance. There isn't, I mean, these are kind of things that it's there or it's not, right? There's nothing extra you can do here. You checked it or you didn't. So these are all compliance issues. We look at, was the IEP sent to the parent within 21 days of the meeting? Are you meeting every year? And did you check off the disability categories? So IEP has to be sent to the parent within 21 school days of the meeting, not of when it begins, but of the meeting. So 21 school days is weird. I don't know why they picked that number and called it school days, because 21 makes you think calendar days, but that's what they said, 21 school days. So I don't make the rules, obviously, because I wouldn't do that. There are 2 364-day timelines. There is a timeline between meetings. You have to meet once a year. So that's a 364 timeline. And then the duration of the IEP is a different 364-day timeline. So you can see here, the meeting was on October 5th. The team decided to make the IEP effective October 15th. So that IEP goes all the way through for a year, until October 14th of the following year. And that gives you time to have your meeting and have another 10 days for the IEP to take effect. I know there are some SAUs where they would make this, where they would make the duration of the IEP be October 15th through October 4th. That's okay. That's absolutely compliant because it's within 364 days. So do whatever your director wants you to do. Disability identification, you check off what the team decided. If you check off multiple, you also check those concomitant disabilities. For the identification to be multiple, that means that those disabilities are equal. They're having equal effect. If you can tease out a primary, you only put that one. You're still addressing the other one in the IEP, whatever effects there are. But in Maine, and other states do this different, but in Maine, it's only multiple if those disability categories are equal. You cannot tear them apart. You cannot figure out which one is driving the bus. And you should be able to, the way I think of it is, in this situation where it's OHI and speech language impairment, you should be able to actually write 2 IEPs, one for the OHI and one for the speech and language, if that makes sense. You're not going to write 2 IEPs, but you should be able to, we should be able to see that both are being addressed throughout the IEP. Section 3, you have to answer all the questions, first of all. If you answer any question yes, that thing needs to be addressed somewhere in the IEP. So we're going to check for that. If you check off behavior, is there a behavior plan? There doesn't have to be a behavior plan. There could just be accommodations, our goals, services, somewhere, something somewhere has to address whatever you check yes here. So this is your kind of table of contents for your IEP, right? You're looking at all of these things, and these are the things that you're addressing in the IEP. This kind of serves as a guide and outline when you're talking with the team about what needs to be in the IEP.
Now, I'm just going to throw a little caveat in here because this has come up when we've been on site, because like Jennifer was talking about, this whole compliance versus best practice is a new thing. And so I've made some notes because the compliance piece of this is things have to be checked. And then if it's yes, it needs to be addressed in the IEP. Now, best practice, I would caution that when you're checking these, make sure that you're checking them correctly. Because, for example, I've looked at some IEPs where H, does the child have academic needs, says no. But then when I get to the academic section, there are academic goals and there are academic needs in 4C. So just making sure that this matches what is happening in the IEP.
Good point. I know there's also some federal guidance somewhere that talks about question 3B, that you have to check it yes if there is any kind of behavior support whatsoever. We won't look at that, but that's a thing that might come up if you end up in due process. You have a question, Jan?
Yes, I can't get my video to work, so sorry.
That's okay.
So is it still the guidance that if you do 3G, that you have to have the evaluation within the evaluation section?
No. Good
That has
question.
changed?
That's
Okay.
a thing that we were doing, and we looked into why are we doing this, and we did not get an answer. So no, we're not looking at that anymore.
So if they have to have like speech to text, text to speech, that type of stuff, then should you be checking that now?
Well, that
You can, yes. Like, because there is a document out there that talks about the assistive technology devices and services. And yes, and so any kind of assistive technology, if you're putting that as accommodations, then that could be checked yes.
Could be, but do you have to? I think that's the question, is that like it seems like almost every student nowadays has some sort of accommodation that would be something to do with technology, but is that considered, I mean, it is assistive. So this is where, like I said, I just didn't know. It was a little bit cut and dry, I think, when it was that you had to have like an augmented communication, like, you know what I mean? You had to have the eval. If you had the eval, you checked it because you had a device that they actually had to use, like a talker or something like that on there. So
right, and there's services associated with that.
exactly, right. Like that's where I see this box, but then maybe I'm reading it wrong.
That's kind of how I see it too. But
Okay.
you know what? Let me write this question down, Jan. This is a good one. We'll dig into this a little more.
I know, and if I can find that article, like I know I have it somewhere. But
Especially, I mean, the way the question is, does the child need technology devices and services? It's not or, it's an and.
Right. And that's where I thought it was more that it was the device, because that's when, in order for you to put the device on, then you had to have the evaluation and the
Right.
services. So that's where I think that and the evaluation piece came in there. And I just see this as, I mean, nowadays for them to do the Maine state testing, if they have, you know, just the accommodation on there for them to have text, to speech, you know what I mean? So it can talk to them through their earphones or whatever,
Right.
then every student would have this marked, but that's not quite how I read it because of the and. Like they don't need the, and I guess you
Right.
have to have a device in order to do that, but
Right. So we are going to look into that. And if you don't hear from us by next week, give us a little.
Jennifer, just a thought on that. The word need for me defines this, right? So we include text to speech or speech to text as an accommodation, which will enhance their access, but they don't need it. Right? So do they
I
need
think if they don't need it, it shouldn't be an accommodation. That's just me.
it?
Everything on the IEP is what's required. I'm going to add that to my question, though, Lena. Now you got me thinking. All right. We're gonna keep going on that one, and we will let you know. All right. Evaluations. You need to keep your evaluations that support eligibility. So in those off years, don't take them off of this section. Keep them in between the 3-year reevals. You can put other evaluations, assessments in there. You can put your NWEAs in there. You can put what's that I'm thinking of? Transition assessments. Whatever you want to put in there, you can put in there, but you have to have those eligibility evaluations in there, and you need to include the name of the evaluation and the date that it was done. Strengths are, if you read the prompt there, it says beyond the evaluative information. We do see a lot of evaluation stuff in this section, but this is really just really observable strengths, what are relative strengths. It's not a restatement of the evaluations. I like to say this is the one place on the IEP that you could get a little bit mushy. You know, throw the parents a bone there. This is a very busy example of section 4A. You could see all of the eligibility evaluations are there, or continuing eligibility. You have your related service evaluations there, and you can see the name of each evaluation and the date it was done. You can absolutely group them, like this is grouped for the psychoeducational report, has the date, and then it lists all of the evaluations that were done. That's fine. You don't have to date each one. This is an example of strengths. Leora loves to read and has strong decoding and comprehension skills. She has strong writing skills and enjoys sharing her stories with peers. She works hard and is very focused on all tasks presented to her. So it's just kind of a little mushier than just straight data like the rest of the IEP is. And I think that's nice for kind of the beginning of the IEP for the parents. All right, gaps. So this is section 4C. Academic gaps. And how do they affect the child's involvement and progress in the gen ed curriculum? So these are distinctly measurable and persistent skill gaps. We highly recommend documenting them in just a bulleted list. And you really want to focus on those really specific skill gaps. You don't want to just put reading, right? There are many skills involved in reading. So you want to put those specific skills in there. How do these gaps affect the child's involvement and progress in the general education curriculum? We see a lot of statements that say, you know, Susie's reading gaps affect her progress in the gen ed curriculum. but it doesn't say how. It just says that it affects it. So really think about that how, and we have some examples. The other thing we look at there, sorry, Carly, is alignment. So for each gap you list here, you need to address that with a goal, right? You don't want to list a gap and then say, oh, we're not going to address that with a goal. So this is where your bulleted list comes in handy. If you bullet these out, you will know I have 4 bullets. I need 4 goals. So 3 things we look at there. These are the broad academic areas: our reading, writing, listening, speaking, and mathematical problem solving. And we have just come up with a few examples of the skills that are involved in those broader areas. So it's the specific skills that you're looking at, really identifying for the student. What are those gaps? And here are some example how statements. So Jimmy's reading fluency deficits impact his ability to access grade level reading material in all subject areas. So doesn't have to be crazy detailed. It just has to be a little more than this impacts his ability to access the gen ed curriculum. So here is an example. We have it bulleted out, so you can see in reading, we have gaps in decoding and comprehension, and these reading gaps affect Jack's ability to access grade level content text. Writing, essay composition, these writing gaps affect Jack's ability to accurately reflect content area knowledge. And multi-digit addition subtraction affect Jack's ability to access higher level math concepts. So here in this example, we have our specific skill gaps bulleted. We have a how statement for each broad area. You don't have to do that. If you can sum it up in one how statement, have at it. If you want a how statement for each specific gap, do that. Up to you, as long as there is a how statement in here that sums it all up, we're good. Alignment. Again, each gap needs to have present level and a goal. So again, this is where your bulleted list comes in handy. So here we have a goal for decoding, one for comprehension, essay composition, and multi-digit addition subtraction. So each gap has a goal, each goal has a gap. We've been seeing a lot of extra goals that the gap wasn't identified, but there's a goal. So you want to make sure that you're kind of, I want to say going in order, but that's not the right word, but you want to identify the gaps, and those are the goals that you're going to write. All right, that was quick.
There are a few questions in the chat box.
Let me look on here. Yes, Jan. Oh, sorry, that was just to me. Yes is the answer. 3B. Is it yes if there are attention concerns? There could be. If you are addressing those attention concerns with I have no word find right now.
Positive behavior.
Or behavior plan or anything, then yes. Did I blow your mind, Lena, with everything on the IEP as a need? We could talk about that more too.
I don't know that I agree with you, so it does kind of blow my mind.
Okay. Sorry about that. I might really, well, I could be here to blow your mind. I don't know. You can put the evaluator for the evaluations, but that it's not required for compliance. And I'm going to say that that would be based on your SAU policies and practices. So whatever your director wants you to do there. Does the strength section need to include strengths in all academic areas, reading, writing, math? I think you want it to be as broad as possible. And yes, you should put strengths and relative strengths. I don't think it necessarily has to have all of those areas unless, again, your director wants you to. One gap could have more than one goal. It shouldn't, because your gap should be specific enough that each gap has a goal, each goal has a gap, the number should match.
And let me clarify that question. So if you have a reading gap, right, a gap in reading in two separate areas, you would have a goal to match each of those. So you wouldn't
But you
necessarily
would have a gap, so you don't just have a reading gap. You should
Correct.
have, it should be whatever those reading skills are. So maybe you have a fluency gap and a decoding gap or something.
Yes, that's what I was saying, is that, so, right, so if you identify in reading that they have both a comprehension as well as vocabulary acquisition.
Okay,
You have two gaps within the area of reading, two
Yes.
goals to match.
yes, 100%, perfect. Can the goals in section 4A be summative? You can put whatever you want in 4A as long as you have those eligibility evaluations. You can put any other thing in there. So yes. Not having. Okay, during our previous state review, we were dinged. We don't use that word dinged, just saying, for not having average range scores for each evaluation given. So maybe is going to be my answer. If the student is identified with SLD, you want to show those strengths and weaknesses because that is that disability category, right? So you want to yes, kind of, I guess is my answer on that. If it's pertinent to that eligibility, if it was considered as part of that eligibility, put it in there. Do we include per day as needed for some accommodations? You can put as needed for accommodations because some are as needed. So that is okay. The eval information for each eligibility area should contain info that links to the gaps, needs, and the goal. Yes, but that's not the only info that you have. Is that what you're saying? That that's the only thing?
No, I'm sorry. You just answered a question about what goes in the eval section as you can put whatever you want there.
You can, yes.
Okay, but I just wanted to make sure, like, we were always told about like that golden thread, like whatever, if you have a goal, there needs to be a need and a gap, a need and a how statement, and that also needs to be reflected in the evaluation information you put in that section. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Sorry, I look like I'm confusing.
It could be yeah, sorry, I just want to make sure I know what I'm asking. So yes, you should kind of.
Basically what I'm saying is, so you should, is it still true that we should make sure that in the eval section, we are including information from the eval, not just a summary or not just the data that came from the tools you use, but make sure that you're covering that there is a deficit there is a gap. And then down in the needs and how section, it's listed there. And then you also have a goal. So you wouldn't have a goal when you went up to the eval section, there was nothing that speaks to that.
Right,
goal
right.
In the eval section.
Yes, but the eval section, it's going to be broader, probably. It's going to be broader information, and then you kind of tease down that to a specific skill gap. All right, I'm handing it to you, Carly.
Okay. Okay, so if you've noticed, we're only focusing on like the academic section today because this is a part one. We will be doing part two of the IEP at our next office hours. So we talked about section 4C, just that those academic gaps being listed, along with the, now we're going to talk, along with the house statement and the alignment, and now we're going to talk about just those academic goals. We'll do functional as part of our part two with sections 6, 7, and 8 at our next session. So just to give you a little heads up about that. So here is the information that we outline in the IEP quick reference document about what is expected for present levels and measurable goals and objectives for academic on the IEP. So the big one, we are not looking at present levels for compliance, but best practice is always what we've talked about in previous trainings about it is the baseline data for that corresponding goal because every goal has a present level directly above it. So that present level should be unique to that goal and is that baseline standard or baseline data for that. And then just remembering to avoid a range, really being specific with your data in that present level. When we look at compliance for goals, we are looking to make sure that they are measurable. So they must have some type of measurement data and it cannot be a specific curriculum or standard scores. Best practice is that those goals would focus on one specific skill that you've outlined in that gap section in section 4C, and that measurement is really based off of how you're measuring that skill throughout your progress monitoring. Then when you're thinking about your goals, you're also thinking about that citation, linking it to a grade level standard. That does need to be there for compliance. And then there's also an alignment piece here where every goal has to be aligned to a service in section 7. And then there's a little one down here about objectives. If a student is going to be taking the alternate assessment, then the academic goal should be checked yes, that there is at least one objective, and they need to have objectives with their goal, at least one. So here we have an example of an academic goal, and this is around decoding CVC words. So you can see it's focused on one specific goal and it is measurable. And then we have that best practice bubble, just reminding you about that present level, making sure that it's really that baseline data for that goal directly following. If you've been to any of our trainings, I'm sure you've seen this before, but here's our pretend reading curriculum, because this explains why we don't use those specific curriculums within goals. Because if you're talking about moving from a level A to a level B, and you're the only one that uses that curriculum, and I know a lot of people are familiar with many different curriculums, and it's like, it's not a big deal, but it also should be understandable to the parent, and the parent may not understand what those levels are. So instead of talking about or using that language within the goal around that specific curriculum, use your curriculum for your teaching, but pull that language out of the curriculum to write your goal. So here you can see that in our reading curriculum, our pretend reading curriculum, this is what you need to do to go from level A to level B, right? So this is, we're saying that, I think his name was Leo, was going to go from these skills and he's going to be able to do these skills. The other problem with using a specific curriculum is that they have multiple skills within them. And as we've talked about, writing your goals really should be focused on one specific skill gap. So Leo may need to work on his consonant sounds, but he may not be working on simple CVC words yet, or sight words. Maybe he's only working on consonant sounds, or maybe he doesn't need consonant sounds, he needs the other things. You know, however that works, because it's really about what Leo needs. So here, you can use your specific curriculums for that teaching piece, but like I said, pull that language out to help write your goals for what you're really looking for your student. And in this case, it's Leo. So this team has determined that his gaps are around decoding CVC words and identifying basic consonant sounds. So those are the goals that he's going to work on throughout the next year. So really focus on those specific skills. Now, another thing to keep in mind when writing academic goals is to write the goal around what the student needs and what their gaps are, and not copying and pasting from the standard. Okay, so the goal is not a standard. The goal is what the student needs. The citation is there, and you do need to cite it to a standard, but you should be writing the goal based on the student's needs, and then looking at your grade level standards and being like, okay, that will help the student meet this grade level standard, and then align it that way. So this goal was written for Jack, and then looking at the standards, we were like, okay, this aligns to this MLR standard. And as always, it's MLR, Common Core, your district adopted standards, whichever one you're using would be the one that you're citing. So, and this just reiterates that Common Core, Maine learning results, or those district adopted standards. So just remembering that compliance is making sure that there is a standard cited with each academic goal. And best practice is to use that grade level standard, the grade level that the student is in. And then when you're thinking about students that are taking the alternate assessment, those goals also need to be cited. And best practice is to cite those alternate academic achievement standards, or those core content connectors, I think is the other name for them. Those would be what you would want to cite with your academic goals if they're taking the alternate. And then here's just another example, because we have been asked in the past how to cite the Maine learning results if you're using those as your goals that you're linking as the standards that you're linking your goals to, because they're not as user-friendly as the Common Core to cite. So this is just one way to do it. We do not come in and make sure it's done this way. We just look and say, okay, they're linked to a standard, great, compliant, moving on. And then this is just an if. So if the student has been identified in section 6B that they're taking the alternate assessment, so 6B is checked yes, and we'll talk about section 6 later, but this is just about the academic goals and objectives right now. So they must have objectives with their goals. So there must be at least one objective, and they should be short-term objectives. So you can see here that this student is working on this goal around participating in conversations and expressing their own thoughts. So you can see within the year, they want them to be able to get to 8 out of 10 opportunities. So then the objectives are just that same goal, basically, that same skill, broken down into short-term pieces. So by February, it would be 6 out of 10, by May, 7 out of 10, to ultimately get them to that year benchmark of 8 out of 10. Then this is that alignment piece for the goals being aligned to a service. So compliance is that whatever you have for a goal in section 5 must be aligned to a service on the service grid. And here you can see, and you might not be able to because they're really probably very small for you to read on your screen, but there are 2 goals around reading. There's 1 goal around writing, and there's another goal around math. So we would be looking in the service grid to make sure that that specially designed instruction is broken down and identifies each of those goal areas that the student will be working on. Okay. Now, we have a little quiz, but before we get to that, I forgot to put in a question slide, so we'll stop. I'll check the chat box and see what's happening. Okay. Do objectives need to also be cited the same as the goal? We only look at the goal for citation. People are typing. Did you answer a question, Jennifer?
I did.
Oh,
I answered Lena's question because I looked it up.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
There was a question by Jacqueline that hasn't been answered.
Yep. Would we cite at the grade level the student is in or where their skills are currently? Best practice is to start at the grade level that they are in. If you absolutely cannot find a standard that links to their gap and you have to go down a grade level, work your way down. But you should start at the student's grade level. For compliance, we're just looking to make sure that there is a citation with the goal linking to a standard. Yes, we know that's really hard when you have those, older grade level students, like the grade 6 student working at a kindergarten level. But start at grade level, and if you absolutely can't find something, okay. Okay, so we have a little quiz to kind of round out our office hours here, or wrap it up rather. So we have, why is this non-compliant? So we have a section 4C with the academic gaps in the house statement, and then we have a section 5 with goals. And this might be a little bit tricky because, like I said, those goals are really hard, a little bit tricky to read. So if you're not really sure, it's okay. But just try your best. But this is we would mark this as non-compliant if we were doing a file review. Right, because there are 5 gaps listed and there's only four goals. See, with the bullets, you can absolutely just count, right? And you know that there's already an extra one. Yes, the conventions is that one, let me see. Yep, it's listed, but there is not a goal aligned to it. Absolutely. So just be really careful, because sometimes, especially when we see those narratives, you can get really talking about a lot of different things that the student has difficulty with or struggles with, and you can put some extraneous gaps in there that then we look for goals and there aren't goals. So. Okay, so Diana just asked a question. We used to have to have separate goals for addition and subtraction. Can they be one goal now, or do they still need to be separated? When we look at addition subtraction, we count that as compliant because they're like reciprocal skills. So you would typically work on them together. So that would be compliant if you had them in one goal, but you can also separate them out. That's your choice on that. Oh, and then this is just, remember, each skill gap requires its own present level and measurable goal. Okay, we have another one. All right, now we're looking primarily at the goal for this one. Why is this academic goal non-compliant? Yes, thank you, Anthony. How can I measure this? Yeah. Yes.
What really is the goal?
Right, exactly. So, right, this goal is not measurable because there is no measurement data. It's really very broad. It's hard to understand, right? So instead, again, really focusing on that skill within what you want that student to do. And in this case, it's reading fluency. So now you can see that they're going to be measuring reading fluency, and there's a data point of where they want Margaret to get to. And in the present level, there's a starting point. So, all right, we have one more. Now I have to say, we see this one a lot when we go and look at IEPs. And I read this and I go, I don't know what I'm supposed to measure, or like what they're at, because I can't tell if I'm supposed to be counting this as an accuracy goal, a fluency goal, or a comprehension goal. So this is one of those examples of it's a copied standard. This is MLR R12 EA. Like this is from there. It's also for grades 4 and 5. EA, in case you don't know, is a grade span of 6 through 8. But this same goal is also for grade 5 and for grade 4, or the same standard. So, but when you tack on a measurement piece, they can do this with 80% accuracy. It seems measurable. However, this is not good. This is really hard to understand, in my opinion. So, any ideas? I wasn't paying attention to the chat. Sorry. Read what? Yeah, it is. It's sufficient is subjective. Yeah. And read what? Sufficient, poorly written. Break into 3 goals or include objectives. Yeah. Right. It does. Should be broken down to work on the gaps to address the student the goal is written for. Right. So you really want to think about that gap and what that student is working on. So you really need to think about what is that skill that you're focusing on, and then make sure that the goal is written around the skill gap and not just copied from the standard. So here's an example of what that might look like instead. I decided that it was because Jack was having difficulty answering comprehension questions. So this goal is around Jack being able to answer comprehension questions. So that's a little clearer than the previous one. And that's it for this part 1. Any questions? We have some resources and things, like we said, we'd share, but any other questions that have come up? Oh, geez, that since I've been talking, sun's right in my face. Okay. So as I mentioned before, this was just a part 1. We did 1 through 5 of academic. Next time we'll be going over part 2 on February 12th, and that will be section 5 functional through the end of the IEP to section 8. So please join us for that. And here are our resources that we like to share. We have that procedural manual that's always been a great resource. At the top where it says the name, the procedural manual, those are links. So if you have, when you get copies of the PowerPoint, or if you have them, you can click on them when they are up on your computer, and it will take you to them. MUSER, the Maine Unified Special Ed Regulations. This was updated in July of 2024 with a few changes. So just a link to that if you'd like to peruse that. It's always good at bedtime if you have trouble falling asleep. 24-25 IEP quick reference document. That is pretty much what we've gone over. Like if you notice the screenshots at the beginning of each section, that's how we break this document down. So it's each section of the IEP with the compliance and best practice. Then we have all of these other resources. We really like to inundate you with resources because, you know, we love to provide things for you, but we know it can be overwhelming. But check it out when you have time. Just go look at things. If you want to see the other quick reference documents, because we have them for all of the eligibility forms and the written notice, you would want to go to Special Education Resources. That is the link that will take you to those. Our professional development schedule for this school year, 24-25, we've done many. We started in September. These links that say YouTube and slides will take you to those recordings that are up on our website. Some are not up on our website yet, so they'll be coming soon. But I think those links take you, yep, those will take you to our professional learning page where they're all listed out. And then this is what's coming up in the future. So you can see we have our 212 where we're doing part 2 of this. Then we have a few more that go until the end of May. So please join us for any of those that you're interested in. Oh, Jacqueline, I see your question about the alternative assessment office hours. We are not rescheduling it. However, the assessment team is recording it and it will be up on our website as soon as that recording is ready and available. Well, this is our professional learning and feedback and contact hour form. A lot of you, I recognize names, so you are probably very familiar with this form. I'm gonna multitask, so I can't talk and do that at the same time. So I just have to pause talking. There we go. The link is in the chat now. And if you fill this out, you're going to select today's date, 1/22/25, compliant versus good, part 1, and give us information about how our trainings are. We really appreciate the feedback. We do look at it. We try to adjust and improve based off of your feedback. So we really do appreciate it. If you enter your email, you will get a contact hour certificate for joining us today, along with copies of the PowerPoints and the IEP quick reference document and the schedule, PD schedule. So I'll come back to that. Okay, and then this is where you can find Maine DOE online on all the social media stuff and our contact information. We really are available whenever you need to get in touch with us. You just reach out to us and we'll get back to you. We try really hard to get back to you within a day or two, but sometimes if we're traveling or whatnot, it takes a little bit longer, but we do our best. If you have questions about, is this compliant? Is this best practice or good? You can send those to us. Just don't send them in an IEP or on a form or anything like that. Hypothetical, just copy and paste it into an email, send it to us. We're happy to give you feedback. And about anything else that comes up. We get questions quite often and we'll be like, we'll talk about that and we'll get back to you, because we don't always have the answer right up front, but we do our best to get it to you. Anything you want to add, Jennifer or Julie?
No, we appreciate how interactive this was. We love that. We love questions. It's so much better than, talking to ourselves. So thank you all very much for that.
Yes, thank you. All right, so you have like 5 minutes left before we were going to leave. So have a good evening, everybody.